last and like final area that I want to discuss with you, which again, I mean, I feel like this has started off quite positive and turned into let's talk about all the really hard stuff. But it needs talking about, Lynn, because when we use the word succession over here, and I hate that word, I would much rather we use transition, but that now means something else in farming, so it's quite a difficult one. Every time you say succession, people just think death, and it's something that Heather Wildman says all the time. Succession means death, and that's why people avoid it or won't engage with it when there is stuff going on in the industry. So let's talk around, and it doesn't, doesn't it? There's a lot more to succession than death, but ultimately the outgoing person will go out of the world eventually. You know, it happens, it's going to happen to us all. So how do we navigate wills? How do we do that respectfully? How do we make sure that if somebody's not happy with a will, that's communicated before it's too late to do anything about it? Like, talk us through the will side of things and inheritance.
Well, I think if we flick back to the positive things that we started to talk about in the beginning, if I've come into a business on a planned, work for equity or however that transition's going to happen, then the will be less relevant. I think succession will be much easier when the will is irrelevant.
Yeah.
I've yet to be convinced that the will is an effective way to transfer assets.
Yeah.
However, if you've got nothing else, then the will is the succession plan. So again, if we go back to the beginning, before a new generation comes into a business, they need to know what their career future is. And if the will is the only succession tool, then they need to know what's going to happen to them if there's a tragedy. If in fact that information won't be shared, I think that's a real red flag that maybe this is not a good career move for me. The difficulty is that people are so emotionally bound to farming on their family's business that they often make decisions with something other than their brain. That the flags might be there, but people choose to ignore them. So are many people in the UK transferring assets while they're alive?
Some will be, yeah, definitely. Yeah, to avoid various tax implications that happens. Yeah.
So to me, if we go back to the things that we've said, if I as the older generation can set myself up how I'm going to be financially and where I will live, then in many ways the will is less relevant. As you age, the point when wills are really crucial is when you're young, when you're your age. What's going to happen? I can remember my husband worked in the canola industry, and we were going to Canada to a conference. We had 5 little kids, and I was going. And I panicked. What will happen if something happens to us while we're away? I went to all sorts of extreme measures to set up how they were going to be managed. I got on the plane and I think I cried for about the first 3 hours of the trip. We both came back alive, so it wasn't necessary. But the will, again, and it's probably worth getting a solicitor to talk about this, although there was one spoke at a conference I was at recently and I could barely keep my mouth closed. A will is supposedly a living document. So you can't write it and then forget it for the next 40 years. It needs to be upgraded and refreshed, looked at. Does it need to change? Has anything changed that needs to change in this document? A succession shouldn't mean death, because the magical part of succession is for an older generation watching the next generation succeed.
Mhm.
And being able to be there and observe and support and encourage, not criticise and question, support and encourage, and see the fruits of not only their physical labour, but their family labour coming to fruition. It's just such a wonderful gift when you see it in action.
Mhm.
So, you know, I really want to take the focus off wills